If you don't know this about me by now, you have probably not been paying attention. I have a thing for mountains and mountaintops. I am crazy for mountains. And when I see the Rockies or the Alleghenies or the Smokies or Ben Moore on the Isle of Mull in the Inner Hebrides or any other mountains, my pulse slows, my blood pressure drops, and I become far more human. Well, at least nicer. I am looking forward to the mountains of Mull with our First Light youth group this summer and a couple of weeks in the fall in Colorado during my sabbatical and renewal time. If I am lucky, and that is a big if, I'll see the aspens in their golden splendor, and with this new body I now possess, I might just make it to the top of Mount Crested Butte, 14,000 feet up. If I do, trust me, there will be pictures. In a far earlier time, mountains were seen as places where people could go to be closer to God. Back in those good old days, heaven was up. God lived in heaven. And so the higher up you could go, the closer to God, physically, geographically, and spiritually, you would be. Jerusalem is built on a mountaintop. The Samaritans worshiped God on Mount Gerizim, a high place. The prophet Habakkuk declares, God the Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He makes me walk upon the high places. The psalmist declares, I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where will my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. Mountains are nature's Gothic architecture, pointing toward the skies, pointing up, and they remind us to look for God. Jesus is with his entourage of disciples. We don't know much about the disciples from Mark. We don't know how many there were. We don't know if they were an all-male club or whether women were included. We don't know the ethnic background of the disciples. They are simply Jesus' students, and they are with him. And they are in Caesarea Philippi, just north of the Sea of Galilee, near the headwaters of the Jordan River, an area that was inhabited by both Jews and Gentiles. Caesarea Philippi was one of the centers of the Roman Empire's power and authority. Herod the Great built a temple to Caesar Augustus in the city. Herod Philip later named the city in honor of Emperor Augustus. Agrippa renamed it in honor of Nero, calling it Neronius. Vespasian billeted his troops there for 20 days and was feted by Agrippa, who then offered sacrifices in Augustus' temple. And who paid for all that? The same people who always pay for the excesses of the empire, the poor and the working class. In the middle of the area, saturated and dripping with the presence of Caesar's empire, Jesus asks his disciples a question. It may seem like a strange question. In fact, it is. Jesus asks his students, who do people say that I am? People have been asking this question in Mark's gospel almost from the beginning. Who is it that even demons fear him? Who is this that can make even lepers clean? Who is this who can forgive sins? Who is this who makes the lame to walk? Who is this who teaches in parables? Who is this that can raise a little girl from death? Who is this who can heal a woman who has hemorrhaged for 12 years? Who is this who has all this wisdom and can do what he does? Who is this Jesus fellow? But now Jesus turns the question on his disciples. Who do you say that I am? Seemingly without hesitation, Peter pipes up, "You are the Messiah." The word in Hebrew that we render as Messiah means anointed or set apart or chosen. But the word carries more baggage than that, because the Messiah was seen as a political, military leader who would right the wrongs, a liberator who would set the oppressed free from beneath Caesar's heavy hand. You, Jesus, are the promised one of God who will set us free from oppression and establish God's eternal empire. We should be surprised if Peter knew the full extent of his profession of faith. And Jesus' response? Jesus doesn't say, "Attaboy, Peter, you've got it." Jesus doesn't say, "Brilliant, my boy." Jesus offers not one word of affirmation in Mark's telling of the story. Instead, Jesus has them sign non-disclosure agreements. Jesus swears all of them to silence. Remember now, in Mark's gospel, Jesus' true identity is a very well-guarded secret. Instead of regaling the disciples with visions of victory and peaceable kingdoms of plenty, Jesus tells them that they are now heading south, heading for Jerusalem, where Jesus will suffer, be rejected by the people and their leaders, and be killed. The invincible warrior savior of the empire of God will be defeated by the empire of Caesar. It is then that Jesus tells his disciples about the very nature of the empire of God. If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? The empire of God is not an empire in which we are guaranteed comforts and pleasures. The empire of God is not an empire in which we amass the treasures of the world and then glory in our prosperity. The empire of God is not an empire wherein we celebrate our accomplishments and boast of our place and position. Rather, the empire of God is one in which those who call it their home are ready to deny themselves in every respect and in every way in order to follow the path that Jesus came to pioneer. Citizens of the empire of God are prepared and willing to make any sacrifice, face any calamity, endure whatever suffering may come because of their commitment to following the way of Jesus. For ultimately, Jesus reminds us that anything that can legitimately be called life is found only in the pathway of self-denial and self-sacrifice and the complete and total embracing of the way of Jesus Christ. My dear friends, life is found in giving ourselves away. Giving ourselves away to meet the need of another. Life is discovered when we break out of our self-absorption and we begin to see the suffering that surrounds us. Life is encountered when we take the blinders off from around our eyes and see the injustice, the unrighteousness, the hateful behavior. When we see the growing shadows of ignorance, bigotry, narrow-mindedness, and falsehood that have become emblematic of the empire of Caesar, and in which we, knowingly or unknowingly, have participated for far too long. Life is found in repenting of past participation and rejecting future involvement in the anti-God, anti-Christ empire of Caesar. And then, in less than a week, Peter, James, and John are with Jesus on a mountaintop. They have ascended the peaks. The world lies below, and they are that much closer to heaven. While they are there, they have an encounter that we cannot fully understand or fully communicate. In the highfalutin language of theology, it's called a theophany. It is a profound and overwhelming experience of the presence of God. Jesus appeared in dazzling white brightness, and with him were Elijah and Moses. Now let's correct something right here. This is the danger in hanging out with good and faithful Jews. Elijah and Moses do not symbolize the law and the prophets, as we have often heard and as even I have often preached. The Jewish understanding of the coming of the Messiah was based on the idea that Elijah would come to prepare the way. That Elijah appears and lends support to Peter's confession that Jesus is the Christ, the anointed, the Messiah. It all begins to make sense. And if you need a supporting witness, Moses is a pretty good choice. God's voice is heard to say to him, "This is my son, the beloved. Won't you listen to him, please?" And just as quickly as it came, it was gone. They were alone on the mountaintop. And it was time to head to Jerusalem. I'm not sure any of that is what the disciples were expecting when they signed on with Jesus. Maybe they did. But my hunch is that they thought it would be a trip to glory and welcome. Instead, it was a trip to suffering, rejection, and death. I am a child of the 70s. I know I don't look that old. The 70s were my high school and college years. Now, you probably would never expect that your pastor listened to the Grateful Dead. I'm not really a deadhead. I could point a few out for you this morning if you'd like me to. And I don't know that the disciples would have been deadheads. I kind of think Peter might have been. But in one of their classic songs, there is a lyric, just 4 little lines. Sometimes the lights are shining on me. Other times I can barely see. Lately it occurs to me, what a long, strange trip it's been. The hard news for the disciples is that the trip is only half over. The first half of the trip is the easy part. The second half of the trip will take everything they have from them. But for the moment, on this Transfiguration celebration, the lights all shining on me. For the moment, everything is as clear as it could possibly be. For the moment, the view from the mountaintop is breathtakingly glorious. But in a moment, it will all be gone. In a moment, it's time to come down from the mountain. In a moment, it's on to Jerusalem and what is waiting there. What a long, strange trip it's been. What a long, strange trip it will be. And what surprise might there be at the journey's end? What a long, strange trip. For now and evermore. Amen.